their garage, the space for it. But a more important thank you to Mayor Carter, St. Paul Police, and our public safety officials across the state. I don't think it's news to anyone here that the tragedy last week with Jamal Mitchell, adding on to the tragedies of Burnsville, and then you can just keep right on going. Law enforcement, of course, seeing an increase in violence against them, but the public also. But I will note that the work of the folks you see in front of you here, some real progress, especially around violent crimes in St. Paul, and I really appreciate the focus and that is being done in that work. And then a special thank you to the legislators who are here. You're going to hear from a couple of them in lead author Senator Gustafson and Representative Berg on this piece of legislation around what I think most Minnesotans would agree, this idea of straw purchasing, to be able to illegally purchase a firearm for someone who should not have it. The problem we're seeing here is keeping firearms out of the hands of the wrong people. And when there are this many firearms on the streets, when they are this accessible to people, tragedies like we saw unfold last Thursday are just all too common. So I think here in Minnesota, whether it is background checks, whether it's extreme risk protection orders, whether it is straw purchase penalty increases, or whether it's just a common sense move around a binary trigger, the idea of being able to modify a firearm to make it basically an automatic weapon in everyone's hands, that was never the intention. And there was always certain limitations around the idea of what should be on our streets, putting people at risk. So this piece of legislation we'll sign makes it clear that those penalties, and if you use a gun in the commission of a crime, especially if you buy that gun to someone who shouldn't have it, there are serious penalties involved. So I just want to say thanks to all the folks, our partners in this in law enforcement around these issues of smart firearm regulations. Just makes sense for everyone. And I will note that as a law-abiding gun owner, a hunter, wherever it would be, nothing that has been passed impedes your right to own and possess a firearm in any way. It makes it harder for folks who shouldn't have them. It makes it easier for families to help get the guns out of the hands of folks who might be experiencing a crisis or shouldn't have them. So this is good work. It's another step in the right direction, and I just can't tell you how grateful I am to the legislators who are willing to step up and do that. So with that, I'm going to turn it to our lead author in the Senate, Senator Gustafson.
Hello, I'm Heather Gustafson. I am the senator for SD 36. I represent the Vadnais Heights, White Bear Lake, and Lino Lakes area. First of all, thanks to the hard work of our volunteers across Minnesota, the BCA, Minnesota Chiefs Association, this common sense, public safety-centered gun bill is now going to be signed into law. And it is a law enforcement bill. While Minnesotans worry about gun violence, gun manufacturers continue to look for loopholes in our laws to make weapons even deadlier, and by doing so create more gun violence in our cities and our neighborhoods. I know those out there who do not like the term gun violence. They feel that the guns are being targeted and it's the people committing the crimes. But our country has a unique relationship and deadly history with firearms, and we don't make our communities safer by ignoring these facts. Every day, more than 120 people in the United States are killed with guns. Twice as many are shot and wounded. Countless others are impacted by acts of gun violence. Keeping guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them is the goal of this bill. Our bill increases the penalty of straw purchase to a felony and also bans binary triggers. Binary triggers have been used in several tragic shootings, including an officer in Fargo and, of course, the first responder and 2 officers in Burnsville. They are unnecessary, they are dangerous. Banning them will help make our communities safer. This also piggybacks on the work that we did last year, including universal background checks, red flag law, and increased funding for victim services. When this bill passed through the Senate, I was at my daughter's softball game the next day, and as I walked by my fellow softball moms and dads, many of them pulled me aside to say thank you. They didn't say congratulations, there wasn't any partisan banter, they just said a full-throated thank you. In fact, one of the softball dads said, "It's about time. Thank you for finally doing something." Our communities expect us to do something. They are tired of empty promises on gun safety issues. They want results. I'm proud this bill delivered. There isn't one law or one policy that will eliminate gun violence, but we can continue to work on common sense policies that prevent more gun-related deaths and still respect the Second Amendment, our treasured hunting traditions. I was lucky enough to join Governor Walz on the pheasant hunt this past year. Our family is also gun owners. We have a hunting cabin in Wisconsin. We want to respect the traditions of hunters, but we also want to make sure that our communities and our neighbors and our families are safe. Thank you to Governor Walz, our DFL colleagues in the legislature, the gun safety groups that were thoughtful volunteers, the staff members who do so much work behind the scenes, including Jackie Clinton, Ken Backus, Selena Costner, Steve Peterson, and Carly O'Neill. Thank you so much for your time.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. I'm Representative Kayla Berg. I represent House District 55B, which is the heart of Burnsville. On February 18th of this year, Burnsville suffered a tremendous loss when 3 of our finest first responders were fatally shot and another injured in the line of duty. That morning, officers Matthew Ruge, Paul M. Strand, and firefighter paramedic Adam Finseth and their colleagues rushed to the aid of a mother and her 7 children facing a terrifying ordeal. That day, our 3 fallen heroes were doing what they loved, heeding a sacred calling and fulfilling the honorable yet heavy duty to protect and serve. Our community continues to grieve and walk the arduous path of healing. This past week, we lost another remarkable hero, Officer Jamal Mitchell of the Minneapolis Police Department, who was also killed by a straw-purchased firearm. Yet another family and community torn apart by senseless moments of violence like Burnsville, Fargo, and Charlotte, North Carolina, to name a recent few. We cannot turn away when our courageous first responders turn towards danger. And so I am proud to have authored the bill, House File 2609, and that our governor is signing into law. This bill increases penalties for straw purchase purposes and makes it easier to prosecute cases where a person has placed a firearm in the hands of a prohibited person. It bans modifications that turn a firearm into a fully automatic weapon, making it nearly impossible for officers to mount a defense. It provides a mechanism for the BCA to report findings on gun trafficking to the ranking members of the legislature so that we can continue to combat gun violence on the state level. In the course of presenting this bill, I have been told we don't have a gun problem, we have a people problem. To that I say, that is partly correct. It's amazing what people will do with economic opportunity, access to mental health care, and affordable health care. Access to affordable housing, food security, and a strong public education. All of that is certainly part of the equation, and much work was done this last biennium to take historic steps to address those issues. I was told guns are just inanimate objects, but show me a list of objects that can do as much damage and inflict such horror on the very fabric of our society. The time of hand-wringing and making excuses is long over. Gun violence is a multifaceted issue, and we must continue to innovate and evolve in response. Today, we take bold action to protect our first responders, our communities, families, and friends. To all of our fallen heroes and their families, in our darkest times, when you or your loved one heeds the call, you show us the very best of humanity. So we honor you. We are forever in your debt, and we hold you in our hearts always. I'll turn it over to Mayor Carter.
Good morning, Governor, Senator Gustafson, Representative Berg, the men and women of our St. Paul Police Department, our Eagan Police Department. Thank you for joining us, all of you who have joined us today. I have to note that I am joined by our First Lady of the city today. I appreciate you being here, Dr. Futrell Carter. I'm trying to impress her governor with a press conference with the governor, so we'll see if that plays out. Last week, our whole state was thrust into mourning. The news of the murder of Officer Mitchell in Minneapolis cut right to our hearts. And I was proud and thankful for the men and the women of the St. Paul Police Department, the St. Paul Fire Department, for having Minneapolis' back in a challenging time as though they did. And in times like that, we always hear, Governor, people say, you know, don't politicize this. Don't politicize that. And maybe if that was the first heartbreak that we had ever felt, maybe I feel like, wait a minute, we shouldn't be having a press conference talking about this stuff in the political space. But it's not the first heartbreak that we've ever felt. It's not the first time that we've tweeted those words. It's not the first time that we've stood at a podium and said, we have to do everything that we can to keep this from happening again. In fact, we've experienced violence against police officers, violence against community members, over and over and over and over. In St. Paul, we rally behind what we call our Community First Public Safety Frame, which is a simple concept that instead of waiting until after something happens and just saying we're going to get there as fast as we can after something happens, we're going to do at a city level what we all know how to do in our own homes and at a family level. When it comes time to keep people safe whose names that we know, the people whose faces we see when we close our eyes at night, we don't just think about emergency response. We think about safeguarding. We think about car seats, and we think about plastic outlet covers, and we think about gates on top of the stairways. We think about how we get as far upstream as possible from the emergency and intervene in ways that can prevent the emergency from happening in the first place. A couple of years ago, I got one of the worst calls that a mayor can receive. You know, I'm always proud to be in our police headquarters and always proud of the men and women of the St. Paul Police Department. But it's not always fun when I get a call from our police department leadership in the middle of the night. We got a call that we had experienced a mass shooting in St. Paul. A dozen people injured. Markeisha Wiley, a 27-year-old woman with a radiant smile, taken from our community. All in the matter of a few seconds, right on West 7th. And that heartbreak, that trauma, turned to real anger when we found out that one of the guns used in that incident had been purchased by a straw purchaser. That gun never should have been in our community in the first place. So, Governor, Representative, Senator, I want to thank you for responding to the moral mandate that we have to go upstream on gun violence. We're doing that in St. Paul with safe storage. We're doing that in St. Paul with everything that we can. We're doing that in St. Paul through our Office of Neighborhood Safety. And we need the state's help to make sure that we make it clear that we are not a state where you can buy a gun for somebody who's ineligible to possess one. I'm tired of people acting like that's a controversial concept. It's not. Sometimes things are controversial in the city hall and even controversial in the Capitol. But every person on every main street in this state, every person, every house in this state knows that we're better off when we take common sense actions like this to make sure that guns cannot get into the wrong hands. So I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you for the courageous leadership it took to get us to this space. I want to thank you for coming to St. Paul to sign this critical bill that will help us in so many other cities across the community. And with that, I want to pass it to St. Paul Assistant Chief Paul Ford.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, sir.
I'm Paul Ford. I'm the Assistant Chief of Police. I just want to thank the governor and the legislature for passing this common sense bill. It's another tool in our belt to go after gun crimes. The number one priority of the St. Paul Police Department is to stop gun violence. Our shots fired in our city has decreased by nearly 50% since 2022. Our non-fatal shooting victims have gone from 80 year-to-date in 2022 down to 41 year-to-date this year. This is just another piece of the puzzle to stopping gun violence. Over the past couple years, we've created a number of units to go after gun violence. Chief Henry talks about the gold medal, prevention and intervention. Enforcement is the bronze medal. If we can prevent and intervene before the gun violence occurs, that's the win. And we've been able to do that in cooperation with Brooke Blakey and the Office of Neighborhood Safety, our gang and gun unit, where we created the Aspire program, which actually does all of that work, intervention and prevention first, enforcement in the last case scenario. This past year, we created a non-fatal shooting unit, thanks to Mayor Carter for supporting that endeavor. Now we are investigating our non-fatal shootings just like homicides, and we are seeing success there as well. And finally, we've adjusted our afternoon gang unit to be able to respond to the non-fatal shootings in a more effective manner. This is a common sense law. We're very lucky to have it. And the last thing that I would like to say is if someone asks you to buy a gun for them, that should be a red flag. Your first question should be why, and your answer should be no. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Roger New from the Eagan Police Department.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Roger New. I'm the Chief of Police at the Eagan Police Department, and I'm also the President of the Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association. And I would like to thank the Governor, Mayor Carter, and the other elected officials for allowing me to be here during this signing of this important piece of legislation. I can tell you, as I heard the other speakers speak this morning, I sat and I reflected upon the early hours of February 18th and standing alongside of Chief Schwartz in Burnsville. And I saw the pain and the anguish that took place with those family members after the loss of their loved ones, those brave and heroic public safety servants in Burnsville. It was truly, truly a tragedy and ripped my heart apart. And then we fast forward to last week and we see another hero live taken. I got to say, this legislation that's being passed today, this bill being signed, is truly an important piece to public safety. And one of the things that I will say as the president of the Chiefs Association, I look forward to rolling up my sleeves and working alongside of our elected officials to come up with more legislation that continues to support and provide protections to our public safety officials. As previously mentioned, we had firefighters that were injured or killed in Burnsville and another one injured last week in Minneapolis. And we need to continue to show our support for our public safety servants that go out and do this difficult work. Because one thing that's really astonished me after these tragic events is this. They keep lacing up their shoes, putting on their gun belt and their ballistic vest, and they keep doing the job. I'm proud of each and every one of them, and I'm proud of our elected officials for taking this brave step forward to sign this piece of legislation into law to further public safety in our communities, because that is our role in law enforcement, is to provide public safety in the communities, and this piece of legislation will help do that. Again, thank you for allowing me to be here, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks to the folks. We'll sign this. I will mention again the last 13 months we've seen more proactive legislation around gun safety and law enforcement than we've seen in decades. I would make the authors talk about the requirements over to BCA on some of the reports. I will also note, because of the funding that was allocated by the legislature last year and this year, BCA has been able to reduce the processing time on firearms from over 180 days 58 days now. What that means is we can speed these investigations, we can get to the folks who committed these in a faster way, and that took the resources that were provided by these legislators last year. So you put these things all together, as Mayor Carter said, we start to move upstream and you start to stack them one on the other. This idea that there's nothing we can do is nonsense. This does not happen in other nations. There are things that we can do and we are doing, and that's why this piece of legislation, another step in the right direction. So I'm proud to sign it. Another step forward. Yeah. Yeah, well, I think for all of us, and I would say dating back to my times in Congress too, I think this understanding about how difficult this work is, trying to get the funding necessary, and then I think the hard conversations we had that for all of us, whether it's being a teacher or in law enforcement, understanding issues so everybody feels included in this. And I think that idea of accountability for all of us, accountability across law enforcement, but also making sure we stay balanced. And I've said this often to be very clear, this is incredibly dangerous work that's very easy on Monday morning to second guess. We all saw last week a decision that has to be made in the matter of seconds with Jamal Mitchell doing what is instinctively in the DNA of people who choose to do public service, exited his squad and was rendering aid to someone who was laying in ambush to take his life. Trying to make sure that we're balancing training, we're balancing resources, but we're also a clear recognition that we're asking folks to do dangerous work. So I think it has been a reckoning that the country has had. I think Minnesota has been somewhat at the center of it. I want to congratulate and thank when you see law enforcement standing here asking us to do things to make their jobs safer, or coming and asking us for funding, or telling us we need a new State Patrol headquarters so that we can do our job. Those are things that we can then fulfill with that. So I think this is it's an ongoing conversation. For me, it's gratifying to see this work done, but it's also a realization last week how much more work we have to do.
Yes, it was a straw purchase gun by the perpetrator's partner, and it
Today's a big step forward for that. But again, like I said before, my role as the president of the Chiefs Association, especially after Officer Mitchell's death, one of the things that I really want to focus on is what are we doing to keep those that work in the role of public safety, whether it be an EMS worker, a police officer, what are we doing to keep them safe and making sure that they have the necessary tools to do their difficult work? I think one of the things that you have to keep in mind, and it's interesting, again, as I mentioned before, the officers keep coming back to work because they take a lot of pride in what they do, and they're asked to go to some pretty chaotic situations where they have to make split-second decisions. And those police officers need the support of our community members and our elected officials when they're out doing their work. And that's where I think, I frequently, I was on the phone on my way here today talking to Senator Carlson regarding all things support.
In political space in the past, try to tell us that requiring accountability and transparency is akin to being anti-law enforcement. What I think we're seeing now is leadership in our state and across our community that is helping us to understand and building policy on the understanding that we can support, and just the same as we learned that supporting our troops doesn't mean supporting bad wars, that when we support our police officers, that starts with making sure that we go upstream to ensure that we're not sending them in to one bad situation after the other. And so I think what I appreciate about this bill and what I appreciate about the leadership that the governor and our legislature have provided for us, it's allowed us to separate the question. We've had people who have said, if you don't like this video of that officer kneeling on George Floyd's neck, that means you must be anti-police, you must hate police. We've got to figure out how to separate those questions and understand that we can cherish good policing and value good policing and know that good policing is critical and sacred for our communities, while, and actually requiring accountability and transparency is a part of cherishing and supporting police officers. So I do think that this advances the spirit of Minnesotans, which holds both of those things true at the same time. And I don't necessarily think that that's a new thing. I think that's been the case for a long time.
I'm the representative of the executive branch, and I think we have those separations in place. We can set, the legislature set some of the guidelines on this. Again, I think trying, as the mayor so eloquently said, trying to strike that balance without an oversimplification or a talking point, the same thing, because I just saw it last week in pardon board proceedings. Look, anybody we put in jail, 97% of them are going to be your neighbor at some point in time. So the goal here is how do we make sure when they are your neighbor that they have been rehabilitated, that they have housing, that they have a job. And I think that's the judiciary has a lot to do with that, and they're independent in making those decisions.
I think every little bit helps. I think that one of the bigger issues is the switches on the guns that make them fully automatic. But I think this is never a one-off deal. Sure, the binary triggers make our communities more dangerous, and when you can shoot more rounds off when you're pulling that trigger, you're more likely to hurt more people. So anything we can do to minimize that and reduce that. But this is not a one-off. We're not like, this isn't the end of the day and we're done. This is a continuous process. We'll keep building on what we have now, and we'll adjust as needed as the times change and circumstances and technologies change. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I'll speak for them. I'm disappointed. I'm also disappointed that St. Paul has safe storage and we were not able to get that. I will go back to this issue on the binary triggers, that the controversial piece of this. I'm telling you, as a lawful gun owner, there is nothing controversial about this. If you right now are listening to this and you have a binary trigger, that's you. Wrong thing. That's you putting in a dangerous situation, and that's something that's been around forever. The idea going back to the 1930s that we regulated automatic weapons. So I'll speak on this one is, yes, I'm disappointed. The idea that if I lose my firearms or someone breaks into my house, the idea that it is somehow controversial to tell the police that I lost 3 handguns and a shotgun and they're now on the streets and here's the serial numbers on them and all of that, this is just, this whole idea that you wouldn't have some guardrails around this. My God, a chainsaw is just a tool, but you don't take the damn thing running into McDonald's to order. This idea that you would have an automatic weapon in your pocket and you lost it, and it's somehow an infringement upon your rights because you're reporting that to law enforcement so they don't kill our family. Yes, I will speak on this one, and maybe the legislators, I'm disappointed, and there's more work to be done. I had a conversation with many of them on this, and I understand. And I think one of the issues was the issue of separating the firearm from the ammunition, putting them in. We'll see it. It'll happen this summer. It happens every couple months. A small child will get into a firearm, and they will either shoot themselves, or they will shoot a cousin, or they will shoot a playmate who's over at their house. I don't know. If you are storing your firearms loaded and unlocked right now, that is just irresponsible. There are rights in this country, and the Second Amendment gives you rights, but every single one of those comes with a responsibility to use it wisely, and the Second Amendment is no different. So I had those conversations with folks. I understand their concerns. I disagree strongly with them. And I say that, again, as someone who has owned firearms my whole life and locks them up. Well, the county attorney got to the right decision. I find it a bit of a stretch that making the case that there were problems in this case, there were things that needed to be addressed, and that was an admission today, was that position was exactly correct, that there was. So there certainly was no politicization in this. We need to make sure that our justice system is fair, and I think what became apparent to many folks is that there were problems in this prosecution from the beginning, and this was the right place it needed in.
Her criticism, you think, is unwarranted. It was the evidence, not
Yeah.
people injecting themselves into this that put the problem.
Yeah, it was very clear that the evidence and what people saw. Well, it was my hope that the county attorney would get to this position. That was very clear. I think you felt it's a, no, it's not my role to talk to. I never talk to county attorneys. We would never be my responsibility. I don't understand that part of it. But the answer to that is that at some point, had this decision not been made, that yes, we would have done that. I also say that I don't take it lightly. I think that is the wrong, it should not be that way, but there is a safety net in there to allow an egregious situation like this to be corrected. And yes, we would have used that to do that. Well, I think I certainly expressed my concerns on this case, and I will say I'm glad we ended up in the place we have. I don't think there's probably a whole lot of extra needed to be added. I think what probably should have been the statement was, after reviewing all the evidence, we determined that the charging decision was wrong, and we've dropped that because my guess is well, not my guess is, the evidence shows that. Every other person said that. So I'll leave it at that. Well, that's false. Next question. Because it's my responsibility on that checks and balance. That authority is given to us by state law to be able to take a look at these things and overcheck. But I think, like so many things, not an expert on immunology, but I can listen to the experts at the Mayo Clinic and make decisions. And the fact of the matter is that every other attorney came to the same conclusion I did. So.
Did you issue an ultimatum to her last week or over the weekend?
I didn't issue that, but I think probably may have got the feeling that that's the direction things were moving. So I've been very clear since you've been asking me this question that we were adding on to the evidence that was going, and I think it was very clear as more and more came out that that was where things were headed. I did not. No, that would not be protocol on that we would make the decision independent of that. Soon. I would just say last week, like all of us here, and rightfully so, we were focused on Jamal Mitchell and what was happening. But yes, we've been working, to look and kept talking about this case as more and more came out, that there were deep concerns with it, and those continued to exacerbate. So, yeah. No Justin Jefferson re-signed. That was good. So there you go. Tom, I'm disappointed. There we go. We're all almost exactly right. So thank you all.